The blood stained my hands as I looked at her body lying on the kitchen floor. My grandmother, the woman who should have protected me, lay motionless, her eyes still open as if to condemn me one last time. The knife I'd used was beside her, gleaming under the yellow light. In that moment, I felt no remorse, only profound relief after years of torment. I didn't know the real hell was just beginning, that my cousin would do everything to destroy me even further. Today, I want to tell the truth that nobody wanted to hear. My name is Ryan. I'm 22 years old, and I spent the last 3 years in prison for something I did, and worse still, for something I never did. Yes, I killed my grandmother. I don't deny that. But I never did what my cousin Deborah said I did. I never touched my grandmother in that disgusting way. I would never violate anyone, no matter how much I hated them. Maybe you've already heard about my case in the local news. Young man kills and violates own grandmother. Those were the headlines. The perfect story to sell papers, right? The monster everyone wanted to hate. But there's a difference between killing someone out of desperation after years of torture and doing what they said I did. I was convicted of both crimes, homicide and something else I prefer not to talk about, as it hurts just to think about it. I spent 3 years in a detention center for young adults. 3 years hearing other inmates call me granny abuser. 3 years getting beaten in the yard for a crime I didn't commit. They took more than my freedom. They took my dignity. I got out 2 months ago. I'm trying to rebuild my life. I rented this small apartment with help from a rehabilitation program. I have nightmares every night. I wake up screaming in cold sweats, reliving everything. I'm not here to ask for your sympathy. I just want you to know what really happened in that house. Many people don't want to hear the killer's side. It's easier to judge me, label me a monster, and move on. But if you're willing to hear the complete story, maybe you'll understand how a normal kid can be pushed to the limit. If you're really paying attention to me, if you can see beyond what the newspapers said, please like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications to receive the next stories, and comment where you're watching from. I need to know that I'm not talking into the void, that someone is really listening. This means more to me than you can imagine. I'll tell everything from the beginning. How my grandmother became my legal guardian, how her torture began, how Deborah, my cousin, participated in everything, and how in a single moment of desperation, I destroyed any chance of having a normal life. But what you'll discover about that day will change everything you think about me. I had a normal childhood until I was 8. I lived with my parents in a small house in the suburbs. My dad worked as a mechanic, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. I remember her helping me with homework at the kitchen table, the smell of coffee she made to get through her double shift. My dad taught me how to fix things on weekends. We were happy as far as possible. Everything changed on a rainy night when I was 8. My parents were coming back from dinner, something rare for them. A truck lost control on the wet road and hit their car head-on. Neither survived. I was sent to live with my paternal grandmother, Mrs. Connie. She was 62 when she took me in, a widow for more than a decade. She lived alone in an old house, one of those with a musty smell and furniture covered in plastic to preserve it. At first, she pretended to be the caring grandmother in front of social workers. She'd buy me ice cream when they came to check on me. But as soon as the door closed, everything changed. "You're just like your father, a useless burden," she'd say while packing my backpack for school. "If it weren't for you, I'd be traveling now, enjoying my retirement." In the first few weeks, I cried every night calling for my parents. Mrs. Connie would bang on the bedroom door. "Shut your mouth, boy. They're dead and they're not coming back. The sooner you accept that, the better." Gradually, I realized my grandmother wasn't just strict or old-fashioned. She actively hated me, hated having to care for me, hated having to spend money on me, hated the sound of my voice, my breathing, my existence. The routine of torture began subtly. First came the disproportionate punishments. If I dropped a glass of water, I'd go without dinner. If I got less than an A at school, I'd be locked in my room the entire weekend. She even controlled how much toilet paper I could use. "3 squares are more than enough, you pig," she'd scream. counting the rolls as if they were gold bars. But the worst started when Deborah, my cousin, began to visit more often. The daughter of my father's brother, Deborah, was 5 years older than me. While I was 9 or 10, she was already a teenager of 14 or 15. For some reason I never understood, my grandmother adored her. Maybe because Deborah was everything I wasn't in her eyes. Obedient, manipulative, willing to agree with everything. Deborah took advantage of this preference. When she came to my grandmother's house, she pretended to be my friend when we were alone. "Ryan, let's play. I have a new game." The game usually involved humiliating me in some way. Once she convinced me to drink a glass of what she said was soda, but it was a mixture of vinegar and salt. I vomited for hours. When I turned 11, my grandmother decided Deborah should live with us. Her father was having financial problems, and Mrs. Connie offered help, something she would never do for me. Now I had 2 people in the house tormenting me. "Aunt Connie, Ryan went through your things," Deborah would constantly lie, just to see me punished. At 13, I tried to tell a teacher what was happening at home. I showed her the purple marks on my arms from when my grandmother would hold me tightly to punish me. "Mrs. Connie is a respected lady in the community," the teacher said incredulously. "I'm sure you're exaggerating." Teenagers often do that. When my grandmother found out, through the school principal who was her longtime friend, that I had made up stories about her, the hell got worse. She locked me in the basement for 2 whole days, without food, just a bucket for my needs. "Want to play the victim now? I'll give you something real to complain about," she said, locking the door. Deborah stayed on the other side of the door, laughing. Poor little liar, comfortable down there? I tried to run away twice. The first time, at 14, I managed to take a bus to the next town, but the police found me sleeping at the bus station and took me back. My grandmother perfectly played the part of the concerned elderly woman, hugging me in front of the police, thanking them for finding me. "He's been very rebellious since his parents died," she explained with tears in her eyes. "I'm doing the best I can." When the police left, she dragged me by the hair to my room. "If you run away again, I'll have you committed to a reform school. I have friends who can make that happen." The second attempt at 16 was even worse. I made it to the state capitol, slept 2 days on the street, but ended up being approached by police when I was trying to get food from a dumpster. When they took me back, my grandmother already had a story ready. "He steals money from me," she told the police. "I think he's involved with drugs." The police looked at me with contempt. One of them even suggested taking me to the station to scare me straight. My grandmother, magnanimous, said that wouldn't be necessary. After that, I gave up trying to escape or ask for help. No one would believe me against a poor devoted old lady who was raising her troubled orphaned grandson. The isolation deepened. I had no friends at school. Who would want to hang out with the weird kid who could never go out? Never had new clothes, never smiled. Deborah, now 21, was in college but still lived with us. She took special pleasure in provoking me, especially when she started dating. She'd bring her boyfriend home and make sure I could hear when they were together in her room. "Jealous, little cousin? Nobody will ever want you like that." At 17, I started working at a supermarket after school. It was my only escape. My grandmother demanded 80% of my salary to pay for my expenses, but I managed to hide a small part. I dreamed of saving enough to leave when I turned 18. It was around this time that I started noticing changes in myself. The anger I had repressed for years began to leak out. I'd break things when I was alone. I had fantasies of retaliation. I began to see my grandmother not as an authority figure, but as my torturer, someone who deserved to suffer as I suffered. When I turned 18, the situation at home drastically worsened. My grandmother, now 72, had developed health problems that made her even more bitter. Arthritis in her hands, high blood pressure, diabetes. She blamed me for each of these conditions. "It's the stress of dealing with you that's killing me," she'd repeat, sitting in the living room armchair, pointing her arthritic finger at me. "You should have died with your parents." I had finished high school, but college seemed an impossible dream. I continued working at the supermarket, now full-time. My grandmother still demanded most of my salary, even though I was an adult. "As long as you live under my roof, you'll follow my rules." Deborah, at 23, had graduated and gotten a job at a law firm. She could have moved out, but chose to stay. I now realize it was just to continue tormenting me, to have someone to dump her own frustrations on. One day, returning from work, I found my grandmother rummaging through my things in my room. She had found the shoebox where I kept the money I was hiding, my savings to escape that place. "So this is how you thank me?" she screamed, throwing the bills in my face. "Stealing from me after everything I've done for you?" "This is mine," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I earned this money." It was the first time I really talked back. She was livid, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Ungrateful. Her hand hit my face with surprising force for someone her age. "I should have left you for the state to raise. At least you'd be far away from me." At that moment, something in me broke. I didn't react physically, not yet, but something changed inside me. The fine line separating thoughts from actions began to blur. Deborah arrived during the argument and, as always, took my grandmother's side. "You're pathetic, Ryan," she said, looking at me with contempt. "You should be on your knees thanking Grandma for everything she's done for you." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, imagining what it would feel like to never have to hear my grandmother's voice again, never again feel that constant fear, that tension that had never left my body since I was 8. The following weeks were a downward spiral. At work, I made mistakes I would never normally make. My manager called me out several times. "You're in La La Land, kid." At home, my grandmother intensified the psychological torture. She seemed to sense she was losing control over me and reacted in the only way she knew, by increasing the cruelty. One day she took the only photo I had of my parents, a Polaroid of them smiling in a park with little me in the middle, and tore it up in front of me. "Stop living in the past," she said. "They abandoned you. You only have me now." I spent the night gluing the pieces together with tape, silently crying. That photo was all I had left of them. My only proof that I was once loved. The next day, Deborah entered my room without knocking, as she always did. She saw the mended photo in my hand. "Wow, that's so depressing," she laughed. "Still crying over Mommy and Daddy? They're probably happy they got rid of you." I stood up so quickly that she was startled and took a step back. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. I didn't do anything. I just stood there, breathing with difficulty, hands shaking. "You're crazy," she said, leaving quickly. "Grandma is right about you." That same week, I discovered something that changed everything. I was cleaning the attic at my grandmother's request when I found a box with old documents, among them my father's will. I read, shocked, that he had left a substantial life insurance policy for me. The money was to be managed by my grandmother until I turned 18, when it should be transferred to me. I was already 18 for months and had never known about this money. I confronted my grandmother that same night. "Where's the money from my father's insurance?" I asked directly during dinner. She froze for a moment, then regained her composure. "What money? Your father left nothing." "I found the will in the attic. I know about the life insurance." Her face contorted with anger. "That money was used to raise you, you ungrateful brat. You think it was cheap to feed and clothe you all these years? I want to see the statements. That money is rightfully mine." She stood up, furious. "You have no right to anything in this house, nothing. I could have thrown you in an orphanage, but I took you in. And this is how you thank me?" Deborah, who was watching everything with interest, intervened. "Grandma, don't stress yourself because of him. He's not worth it." But my grandmother was beside herself. She went to the kitchen and came back with a yellowed envelope. She threw it on the table. "Want to know so badly? Look there. The money ran out a long time ago. I spent it all on you in this house." I opened the envelope. They were bank statements from an account I never knew existed. It showed regular withdrawals over the years, but also transfers to another account, an account in Deborah's name. "Why did Deborah receive money from my insurance?" I asked, feeling my blood boil. My cousin turned slightly pale, but my grandmother didn't flinch. "Deborah has always been like a real granddaughter to me. She deserves help with her studies, unlike you, who barely managed to finish high school." At that moment, everything became clear. The money that should have secured my future, that could have given me a chance to escape, had been diverted to my cousin. While I was working at the supermarket, handing over almost my entire salary to my grandmother, she was financing Deborah's college with my father's money. "You stole from me," I said, my voice almost disappearing. "All these years?" Deborah had the audacity to laugh. "Don't be so dramatic, Ryan. Grandma just did what was best. You would never have used that money properly anyway." I left the house that night. I walked aimlessly through the city. I thought about never going back. But where would I go? With the little money I had hidden, I couldn't even rent a room. I returned hours later, determined to gather evidence of the money diversion and perhaps find a lawyer. In the days that followed, my grandmother began to treat me in an even more degrading way, as if she wanted to punish me for discovering her betrayal. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, she accidentally spilled hot coffee on my leg. "Oh, how clumsy I am," she said, making no attempt to help me as I screamed in pain. At night, when I got home, I found my room ransacked. My few clothes were scattered on the floor, some cut with scissors. "What happened here?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "I found some rats in your room," my grandmother replied with a malicious smile. I had to check where they were hiding. Deborah watched from the door, clearly enjoying herself. "Too bad, little cousin. Looks like you'll have to buy new clothes. Oh wait, you don't have money for that, do you?" That's when I started planning my definitive exit, not just from the house, but from that situation. I began researching about the life insurance, about my legal rights. I discovered I could file a lawsuit against my grandmother for misappropriation. A week later, I returned home earlier than usual from work. I wanted to look for more documents that proved the diversion of money. I entered the house quietly and heard voices in the kitchen. They were my grandmother and Deborah talking. I approached without making noise. "He's becoming dangerous, Grandma," Deborah was saying. "You saw the way he looked at me the other day? I'm afraid of what he might do." "Don't worry," my grandmother replied. "I've already spoken with Dr. Martin. He agreed we can have Ryan committed if necessary. Just say he's having violent behaviors, that he's a danger to himself and others." "That would solve everything," Deborah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "And what's left of the money would be all yours, darling," my grandmother added, "as it should have been from the beginning." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. They were planning to have me committed to a psychiatric institution to get rid of me and keep the rest of the money. I left the house without them seeing me and spent the rest of the day wandering the streets, trying to process what I had discovered. It was a perfect trap. Who would believe me against an elderly lady and her exemplary niece? Dr. Martin had been the family doctor for years, a personal friend of my grandmother. If they said I was having psychotic episodes, he would sign the commitment without blinking. That night I returned home late. The house was dark and silent. I went straight to my room but couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about their words, about the plan they had for me. I felt a change happening inside me. The fear I had always felt was being replaced by something darker, more intense. The next morning, my grandmother woke me up by banging on the door. "Get up, you bum! There's work to do before you go to the supermarket." I got up and went to the kitchen. She was there preparing her breakfast. Not mine, of course. I would have to prepare my own, as always. "Clean the garage today," she ordered. "It's a mess, like everything you touch." I looked at her, at that wrinkled face that had become the symbol of all the suffering in my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. 3 days after the conversation I overheard between my grandmother and Deborah, what they would later call the incident happened. For me, it was the moment I finally reacted after years of being broken into smaller and smaller pieces. It was a Sunday. Deborah had gone out to meet some friends, and I was alone at home with my grandmother. I had just finished cleaning the whole house, as she required me to do on weekends. I was exhausted, but I knew any sign of tiredness would be interpreted as laziness and would result in more humiliation. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she came in. She observed what I was doing with that critical look of hers. "You can't even fry an egg right," she said, approaching. Useless like your father. I continued stirring the egg in the pan, trying to ignore her. In the last few days, since discovering the plan to commit me, I had been keeping quiet, avoiding confrontations. I wanted to buy time while deciding what to do. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," she suddenly screamed, grabbing my arm. The abrupt movement caused me to spill the hot oil from the pan. Some drops splashed onto her arm. It wasn't serious, just a few small red spots on her skin, but to her it was as if I had done it on purpose. Her eyes widened with fury. "You monster!" she screamed, "trying to burn me. Is that what you want? To kill me?" "It was an accident," I replied, backing away. "You pulled me." Liar. She grabbed the pan with the still hot egg and threw it at me. I managed to dodge, but the oil splashed on my arm, causing a searing pain. Instinctively, I put my hand to my burned arm. She took advantage of my moment of distraction and grabbed a plate from the sink. Before I could react, she hit my head with it. The plate broke, and I felt a warm liquid running down my temple. Blood. "Now that's right," she said with sick satisfaction in her voice. "Now I have proof that you're violent. I'm going to call Dr. Martin right now. Today you're going to the mental hospital, where you should have been a long time ago." That's when I realized she was deliberately provoking that situation. She wanted to hurt me, to have evidence against me, to justify my commitment. The entire plan I had overheard was being put into action at that moment. As she turned to pick up the phone, I felt something break inside me. Years of torture, humiliation, theft, and now this. She was willing to completely destroy me, to lock me in an institution for the rest of my life. And why? For money. For pure hatred. I don't remember exactly what happened in the next few seconds. It's as if my mind had disconnected from my body. I only remember seeing the kitchen knife on the counter. I remember grabbing it, and then I remember her turning to me, her eyes widening as she saw what I was holding. There were no words, no hesitation. I lunged at her with a force I didn't know I possessed. The knife entered her chest once, twice, 3 times. She didn't even have time to scream. She fell to the kitchen floor, her eyes fixed on me, full not of pain, but of surprise, as if until the last moment she didn't believe I would be capable of reacting. I stood there motionless, looking at her body, at the blood spreading across the white tile floor I had just finished cleaning. The knife still in my hand. A strange calm invaded me. A feeling that for the first time in many years, I had control over something in my life. I don't know how long I stood like that, motionless in the kitchen. Minutes, hours. Time seemed to have lost meaning. I only know that at some point I heard the front door open. Deborah had returned. "Grandma Ryan, where are you?" she called from the living room. I didn't move. I didn't try to flee. I didn't try to hide. I simply waited, still holding the bloody knife, as I heard her footsteps approaching the kitchen. When she came in and saw the scene, her dear grandmother lying on the floor in a pool of blood and me standing beside the body, her face went through a sequence of emotions: shock, horror, and finally, a kind of perverse satisfaction. "You finally did it?" she said, her voice trembling, but with an almost triumphant tone. "You killed her?" She didn't scream, didn't run. Instead, she picked up the phone and dialed 3 numbers. 911. "Police, I need help," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "My cousin killed our grandmother. He stabbed her, and I think before that he touched her in a disgusting way. Please, come quickly. I'm afraid of what he might do to me." I heard those words with a mixture of disbelief and horror. She was adding an element that never existed. She was turning a terrible crime into something monstrous. "What? No!" I shouted, finally coming out of my torpor. "That's a lie! I killed her, yes, but I would never, ever do something like that." But Deborah continued talking on the phone, ignoring my protests. "Yes, he's confessing to the murder right now. He's bloody, still with the knife in his hand. Please, come quickly." When she hung up, she looked at me with a cold smile. Now no one will ever believe you, Ryan. Never again. I let the knife fall to the floor. The reality of what I had done and what Deborah was accusing me of began to sink in. I had killed my grandmother. I was a murderer. And now, thanks to my cousin's lie, I would be seen as something even worse. The police arrived minutes later. I offered no resistance. As they handcuffed me and took me to the squad car, I saw Deborah crying copiously for the officers. The transformation was impressive, from cold accomplice to desperate granddaughter in a matter of seconds. "He's always been disturbed," she said between sobs. "My grandmother did everything for him, and look how he repaid her." On the way to the police station, I tried to explain to the officers. I told them about the years of mistreatment and physical and psychological torture, about the stolen money, about the plan to commit me. But I saw in their faces that they didn't believe a word. To them, I was just another criminal trying to escape responsibility for his actions. At the station, the interrogation was brutal. The detective in charge of the case, a middle-aged man with deep eye bags, looked at me with contempt as I tried to explain my version. "So, you admit to killing your grandmother, but deny violating her?" he asked ironically. "I never touched her that way," I replied desperately. "Deborah is lying. She wants to keep what's left of my father's money." "It's convenient to blame your cousin, isn't it? She told us you've had sick fantasies for years, that your grandmother was worried about your behavior." I realized I was in a nightmare with no exit. Deborah had perfectly prepared the ground. While I suffered silently all those years, she was probably spreading rumors about my supposedly problematic behavior, creating a history that now served to corroborate her accusations. I was formally charged with aggravated homicide and elder abuse. The public defender assigned to my case barely looked at me during our first meeting. "Look, kid, I'll be honest. The evidence is overwhelming. You were caught red-handed. The best strategy is to confess and show remorse to reduce the sentence." "But I didn't do what she said I did," I insisted. "I can confess to the homicide, but I won't confess to something I didn't do." He sighed tiredly. "Your cousin has a convincing testimony. She says she found evidence in your grandmother's room and that the old lady had commented on your inappropriate behaviors. The coroner found bruises on the victim's thighs." "That was from herself," I shouted, losing my composure. "My grandmother had circulation problems. She was always getting bruised and didn't even notice. Ask her doctor." "Her doctor has already testified for the prosecution," he replied dryly. "Said your grandmother had expressed fear of you in recent months, Dr. Martin." Of course he would testify against me. It was part of the plan from the beginning. The conspiracy was broader and more elaborate than I had imagined. The trial was quick and devastating. Deborah cried on the witness stand, describing how she found the crime scene, how she had suspected my sick behavior for a long time. She mentioned finding my grandmother's underwear in my room days before, an absurd lie that I had no way to refute. Neighbors testified to having frequently heard screams coming from the house. "Poor Mrs. Connie always seemed frightened," said one neighbor. "Now I understand why." My lawyer did a mediocre job on the defense. His main strategy was to argue that I had mental problems and needed treatment, not prison. Exactly what my grandmother and Deborah had originally planned for me. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. The verdict? Guilty on all charges. Being of legal age, but still young, 19 at the time, I was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years, provided I showed significant behavioral and psychological improvement. As they led me from the courthouse, I saw Deborah for the last time. Our gazes met, and for an instant, the theater fell away. She smiled. Not the smile of pain of the grieving granddaughter she had shown to the court, but the satisfied smile of someone who had gotten exactly what they wanted. In prison, the first months were an even greater hell than my grandmother's house. The other inmates quickly discovered what I had been accused of. Granny Abuser became my nickname. I was beaten so many times I lost count. The guards turned their faces, pretending not to see. I thought about killing myself several times. I even prepared an improvised rope with sheets, but something stopped me at the last moment. Maybe the stubbornness of not giving Deborah the final satisfaction. maybe the thin hope that one day the truth would come out. For good behavior, and because I was a first-time offender, after 3 years I was transferred to a more lenient regime in an institution for young offenders. It was there that I met a psychologist different from the others. Doctor. Henry didn't look at me with the contempt or fear I was used to seeing. He really listened to me. Ryan, I want you to understand something, he told me after several sessions. What you did, killing your grandmother, was wrong. Regardless of what she did to you, taking someone's life is never the answer. I nodded. I had already reached that conclusion. The remorse consumed me, not just for the act itself, but for having given in to the same kind of violence that had victimized me. But, continued Dr. Henry, that doesn't mean you deserve to carry false accusations. If what you told me about the mistreatment and about the accusation of violating your grandmother is true, you were the victim of an additional injustice. It was the first time someone had considered that I might be telling the truth about Deborah's lie. I cried in that session as I hadn't cried since I was a child. With Dr. Henry's help, I began to document my story. He encouraged me to write everything down, from the first days with my grandmother to the crime and its consequences. Not to publish or to use as a defense now, he explained, but to organize your thoughts, to heal. Writing became my salvation. Page after page, I exorcised the demons that tormented me. I remembered details I had blocked. I made connections I hadn't noticed before. The systematic torture, the constant manipulation, the theft of my money, everything fit into a clear pattern of exploitation. In the following years, I dedicated myself to studying in the institution's library. I completed the equivalent of the first year of law through a program for inmates. I wanted to understand the system that had failed me, perhaps to one day use it to my advantage. At 21, after 3 years and 2 months of detention, I received the news that would change everything. I would be released early for good behavior and for having successfully completed several rehabilitation programs. Dr. Henry had advocated strongly on my behalf, presenting detailed reports on my psychological progress. On the day of my release, he handed me an envelope. I can't do much more for you officially, Ryan, but here's the contact of a lawyer who works with criminal case reviews. She superficially reviewed your case and believes there are inconsistencies that deserve investigation. I left that place with just a backpack containing some clothes, my notebooks full of notes, and that envelope. A whole world to rebuild, a truth to prove. During the 3 years I was in prison, I learned to survive in a hostile environment. At the beginning, I was a constant target because of the nature of the crimes for which I was convicted. The other inmates formed a perverse hierarchy, and at the bottom of the pit were the abusers. I lived in a constant state of alertness. "Look at him, the old lady pervert," they would say when I passed by. I learned to walk looking at the ground, to become invisible when possible, to stay near the guards during yard time. Even so, I took beatings that left me with permanent scars. Once, 3 inmates caught me in the bathroom. They beat me so hard I broke 2 ribs. When the guards asked what had happened, I said I had slipped. I knew telling the truth would only make things worse. "You're learning how it works here?" said an older guard as I was being treated in the infirmary. There was no sympathy in his voice, just the statement of a fact. Gradually, however, things changed. I started frequenting the library and attending the classes offered at the institution. I kept my head down, did my work, caused no problems. The guards began to notice me not as the granny abuser, but as that quiet guy who was always reading. The turning point came when I helped an older inmate write letters to his daughter. He was functionally illiterate, and when he discovered I had a way with words, he asked for my help. I wrote beautiful, moving letters that made his daughter start visiting him again. The news spread, and soon I was writing letters for several inmates. "You have a gift, kid," said Peter, a man convicted of armed robbery, who had become a kind of protector for me. "You make people seem better on paper than they are in real life." "I just write what they truly feel," I replied. "Everyone has something good to say." That's when I started thinking that maybe I could use this gift to tell my own story someday, not to make myself look better, but to show the complete truth with all its complexities. In sessions with Dr. Henry, I began to develop a deeper understanding of what had happened to me. "You were a victim of prolonged torture," he explained to me. "What happened on the day you killed your grandmother is what we call an acute stress response. Years of accumulated trauma erupted all at once." "Does that make me less guilty?" I asked. "It's not about guilt or innocence in the legal sense," he carefully replied. "You took a life, and that has consequences. But understanding the context is crucial for your recovery and to prevent something like this from happening again." We worked a lot on my anger. Anger against my grandmother, who even dead still exerted power over me. Anger against Deborah, who had destroyed any chance of redemption I might have had. Anger against a system that failed to protect me when I was a child and then failed again to judge me fairly. "Anger is like acid," said Dr. Henry. "It can be useful for dissolving obstacles, but if you hold it inside, it ends up corroding you from within." Slowly, painfully, I learned to channel that anger into something productive. I studied with an intensity that surprised even the teachers of the educational program. "You could have gone to a good university," commented my literature teacher after reading an essay I wrote. "I still can," I replied with a determination I hadn't felt since before my parents' deaths. When I left prison 2 months ago, the world seemed immense and frightening. Freedom, so dreamed of, came with a paralyzing fear. Where would I go? What would I do? Who would accept me knowing my past? A reintegration program helped me find this small apartment and a job at a print shop. The work is simple. I operate a paper cutting machine, but the owner, Mr. Gomez, knows my story and still gave me a chance. "Everyone deserves a fresh start," he said on my first day. "Just don't waste the opportunity." I don't intend to waste it. In my spare time, I continue studying. I contacted the lawyer Dr. Henry recommended, Attorney Caroline. She reviewed my case and, although she can't promise anything, believes there are elements to question my cousin's accusation against me. "The medical report is inconclusive," she explained in our first meeting. "The bruises could have various origins, including circulation problems, as you mentioned, and there are inconsistencies in your cousin's testimony. Hope is a dangerous thing for someone like me. I've learned not to trust it. But even so, I feel a small flame ignite inside me when I think about the possibility of clearing my name, at least from that accusation. I don't seek complete absolution. I killed my grandmother. It was wrong, regardless of what she did to me. If I could go back, I would have simply left that house, reported the money diversion, sought legal help. There would have been other paths that didn't involve violence. I carry this regret with me every day. I wake up in the middle of the night, in cold sweats, reliving that moment in the kitchen, seeing the blood spread across the white floor, feeling the weight of the knife in my hand, hearing her last breath. I also frequently dream about my parents. In the dream, they're looking at me with expressions I can't decipher. Are they disappointed? Understanding? I never know. I wake up from these dreams crying. I haven't had contact with Deborah since the trial. From what I learned through Attorney Caroline, she sold my grandmother's house and moved to another state. She probably took what was left of my father's money. Sometimes I wonder if she can sleep at night, knowing the lie she told, the life she helped destroy. Other times I think about what I would say to her if we met again. In my darkest moments, I imagine confronting her, making her confess. In my more lucid moments, I realize that the best I can do is move forward, rebuild my life away from her and everything she represents. I attend a support group for former inmates. There I found people who understand what it's like to carry the weight of a terrible mistake, who know what it's like to try to rebuild a life when society has already labeled you a monster. "The guilt never completely goes away," said an older man in the group, convicted of killing someone in a car accident while driving drunk. "But you learn to carry it in a way that doesn't crush you every day." That's what I'm trying to do. Learn to carry my guilt without being completely crushed by it. Accept that I did something terrible without allowing it to define who I am or who I can become. As for the false accusation, the search for truth is more complicated. Even if Attorney Caroline can prove that the abuse never happened, it won't erase the years of humiliation in prison, the beatings, the label I carry. Some stains don't come out no matter how hard you scrub. But maybe it's not about completely erasing the past. Maybe it's about not allowing it to control my future, about finding in the rubble of the person I was material to build someone better. If you've made it this far and really understood what I went through, please like this video now. Subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, turn on notifications to receive more stories like mine, and comment what time it is where you're watching this. It might seem like a strange request, but knowing that real people are listening to my story at different times of the day in different places makes me feel less alone in this journey. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if I'll ever completely clear my name. I don't know if I deserve a second chance after what I did, but I know I'm trying. I know that each day I wake up and choose to move forward, each day I choose not to give in to hatred or despair, is a small victory. Maybe that's what redemption means. Not one great moment of triumph, but a series of small choices day after day to be better than I was yesterday, better than the worst moment of my life. This is my story. I don't tell it to justify what I did, but so that maybe someone in a situation similar to the one I was in, trapped in a cycle of abuse, seeing no way out, might find a different path. A path without violence, without blood, without regrets that will last forever.